Something strange is happening on the western edge of Europe. So strange that even the people who study this continent for a living can't agree on how to explain it. A country long treated as the Eurozone's quiet, debt-burdened cautionary tale has started behaving like the protagonist of an economic plot twist no one wrote. Portugal, once synonymous with bailouts and austerity, has suddenly become the student outscoring the teachers. And just when Europe thought it understood the hierarchy of its own economies, the rankings shifted in a way that shouldn't be possible. It began with a headline that felt almost accidental. In 2025, The Economist evaluated the world's 36 richest nations, jobs, inflation, markets, growth, and declared Portugal the economy of the year. The compliment was wrapped in a joke comparing the country's performance to a pastel de nata, light, sweet, and shockingly satisfying. But beneath the humor was a problem. Economies that spent years struggling under debt don't suddenly rewrite their story. Not without warning, not without cracks, not without someone noticing the shift before it becomes undeniable. But that's exactly what happened. Investors started moving money before analysts could agree on why. Portugal's stock market surged more than 20% in 2025, numbers that belong to tech hubs or commodity booms, not a country better known for quiet resilience than economic fireworks. When Portugal's prime minister called the award a fair recognition of the hard work of the Portuguese people, it didn't sound like political self-congratulation. It sounded like someone hinting that the world had arrived late to a story already well underway. To understand how far the country had traveled, you have to remember how deep the starting point was.
Portugal's largest bank has run into some trouble. Reports of a missed debt payment sent shockwaves across the markets worldwide on Thursday and Friday, raising fears that the effect could end up bogging down Europe's already sluggish recovery.
Portugal's president says the country's next government faces an unprecedented challenge. The warning comes as economic pressure increases to follow Greece and Ireland in asking for an EU and IMF bailout to rescue the country.
This week, Portugal. On the brink of a bailout, the Prime Minister steps down after plans to cut the budget were rejected.
The bailout years left wounds that didn't heal quickly. Youth unemployment drained talent. Entire communities hollowed out as people searched for opportunities elsewhere. Portugal became a warning label inside the Eurozone, evidence of what happens when debt collides with recession. But something almost invisible was forming beneath the pessimism, the kind of change that doesn't announce itself until it becomes impossible to ignore. The first clue was the job market. While much of Europe fought sluggish employment, Portugal's labor force began acting like an economy preparing for takeoff. By 2025, unemployment fell to a 12-month average of 6.3%, down from 6.5% the year before. Employment hit record levels, and this was the part economists kept staring at. Both labor demand and labor supply rose at the same time. That doesn't happen in countries still recovering from old shocks. That happens when an economy quietly recalibrates and starts pulling people back in. Yet the job numbers were just the first tremor. Growth returned in a way that contradicted every forecast built on global slowdown. Portugal's GDP rose 0.7% in the second quarter of 2025 and 0.8% in the third, even as Europe braced for stagnation. But the real surprise was where the growth came from. Not exports, not a tourism spike, but domestic demand. Ordinary households spending more because wages were rising, interest rates on loans were falling, and the government injected new disposable income through pension bonuses and tax refunds. Even construction, which had been turning downward, snapped back into motion mid-year. And then there was inflation, Europe's most feared variable behaving strangely well in Portugal. After dropping to 2% in the second quarter, it crept modestly to 2.3% due to food prices. But forecasts still showed a smooth descent toward 2% in 2026 and 2027. Energy prices softened, industrial goods stabilized, services inflation drifted downward. While major economies wrestled with instability, Portugal's numbers looked almost suspiciously calm. That was the moment analysts started whispering. Was all of this luck? A rebound effect? A statistical illusion created by timing? But the data refused to support any of those explanations. There was a deeper engine at work, one that didn't rely on spectacle. Portugal had rebuilt itself around something larger economies often neglect: its people. Rising wages, strong job creation, a slow release of pandemic-era savings. And at the center of it all, billions in EU recovery and resilience facility funds reaching their peak deployment in 2025 and 2026. But Portugal didn't treat that money as a bandage. It treated it as reinforcement. modernizing infrastructure, digitizing systems, and strengthening economic foundations that had been brittle for too long. But the real twist wasn't the funding, it was speed. Small economies can collapse quickly, but they can also shift quickly. Portugal turned its size, usually framed as a vulnerability, into an advantage. When global tourism softened, domestic tourism snapped forward. When construction slid, investment roared back. When inflation spooked markets, Portugal's numbers stayed steady. Each adjustment rippled through the system faster than in countries weighed down by scale, bureaucracy, or political gridlock. As those ripples compounded, Europe's assumptions began to fracture. Public debt, once suffocating, was projected to fall below 90% by 2026. GDP growth was forecast at 1.9% in 2025 and 2.2% in 2026. Unemployment was expected to drop to 6.1% by 2027. Even the current account remained positive despite rising imports. Portugal wasn't just keeping up with the Eurozone, it was outrunning it. By late 2025, the narrative flipped. Analysts rewrote forecasts, investors revised risk models. Southern Europe, long dismissed as fragile, found itself with a new pace setter. And that left the uncomfortable question hanging over Brussels. What exactly had Portugal figured out that others missed? Because this wasn't a one-off tourism boom. It wasn't a manufacturing miracle. It wasn't a discovery, trend, or windfall. It was something more disciplined and more difficult, a redesign of the growth model itself. Portugal shifted away from reliance on debt or export volatility and towards a loop driven by internal momentum. Rising wages fed consumption. Consumption pushed businesses to expand. Businesses created jobs. Jobs pulled people back into the labor market. And the cycle repeated with a stability that larger economies, tangled in complexity, couldn't replicate. Piece by piece, Portugal created a growth engine that ran without overheating. Inflation stayed controlled, not through force, but through alignment. Public debt fell not because of austerity, but because the economy grew faster than the interest costs weighing it down. The system didn't sprint, it accelerated smoothly, and that is where the truth finally emerges. Portugal didn't become the Eurozone's new star because it stumbled into fortune. It became the star because it engineered a form of growth Europe has been trying and failing to achieve for years. Steady, balanced, durable. Growth that strengthens the system instead of straining it. Growth rooted not in speculation, but in stability. Now the rest of Europe is left with a new uncertainty, one it isn't accustomed to confronting. Not whether Portugal can survive the next crisis, but whether the old hierarchy of European influence is beginning to tilt. Because when a former bailout country rewrites its trajectory, it forces the rest of the continent to reconsider its own. Portugal didn't just rise, it changed the rules of the game, and Europe is still trying to understand how. If you got value from this video, make sure to like and subscribe. And don't stop here. Click the video on your screen for another deep dive into economics. See you there.